to have a preserved remnants of the Ark. So, on the other hand, the site that we've been talking about in the mountains across the valley, those are sedimentary rocks. They're not volcanic rocks. Sedimentary rocks, water-laid rocks, the type of rocks that one would expect from flood activity. Another thing about Mount Ararat is that it's a glacial-covered mountain peak. I don't know the exact dimensions, and it varies according to the weather, of course. The glaciers shrink back in the summertime, and they extend in the wintertime. But several thousand feet of the mountain's top are covered with glaciers, and these glaciers, of course, scour the rock of the mountainside. So if you had an arc-shaped object up there, it would suffer from the same damage that the scouring of the rock would suffer from. Now, the formation that we have, as it's been surveyed both from aerial photographs and on the ground, it's been measured both ways, is 150 meters long, or almost 500 feet. If you take that long Egyptian cubit, assuming Moses is the author of the account, or the transmitter of the account, and apply that standard of measurement, it is interesting that this formation, either in the photographs or on the ground, has measured to essentially what would be 300 cubits long. Now, that's a remarkable correspondence. It's not 500 cubits, it's not 150 cubits, it just happens to be 300 cubits long. And the biblical story just happens to record the length of the ark as 300 cubits long. One further suggestion about the width of the formation. If you take the biblical measurements and add them up, you come out to a figure relatively close to the width of the formation in this way. The height of the ark was 30 cubits, the width of the ark was 50 cubits, and the height of the ark was another 30 cubits. Now, if you add that up as the distance around the hull of the ark, you get 110 cubits. The width of the formation, as measured on the ground, is 150 feet. Now, just as a rough figure, 100 cubits would be 150 feet. So it's relatively close. It's not precise and not exact, but it's relatively close, even figuring it that way. I've seen 3 of those stones in the field. One is in a village and 2 are out in the fields by the village. The first point that one can make in comparing with anchor stones, and we have many, many anchor stones to compare with. Anchor stones were the common way to anchor ships until iron came in about 1200 BC. Anchor stones are tall in one dimension. They are thin in another direction, and they have a hole at the top. Now, the major difference between this type of stone that we find here in Turkey and the stones that we find in the Mediterranean are that this is larger. This is taller than a man by a foot or so. You could project that and say maybe it goes along with a larger ship. Now, the other aspect of these stones is their iconography. Somebody has carved some signs into them, as you can see from this one right here. The large cross in the center would be Noah. The medium-sized cross to the right and below would represent Noah's wife. 3 of the crosses up one side, above the arm of the cross, the major cross, would represent Noah's sons. The other 3 crosses up the other side would represent the wives of Noah's sons. There's exactly 8 crosses. There are 8 people in the flood story, and these are engraved upon stones that look very much like anchor type of stones. The people who put those crosses on these stones saw some type of connection between these particular stones and the idea of Noah and the ark and the 8 people that were in the ark according to the biblical record. Now, these stones are very unusual and irregular in that they are not near any normal natural body of water. It seems evident to me that somebody either wanted to depict something like an anchor stone or actually used an anchor stone in this area. And yet the nearest bodies of water are 75 miles to the southwest and 100 miles to the north. No normal, natural, reasonable explanation for why anchor stones would be used in this particular area.
Many qualified scientists and archaeologists contend that Ron Wyatt's methods are absurd. They say that Ron is a victim of his own rhetoric and that his facts, while partially true, are equally suspect. He's been accused of placing relics at the site and then falsely claiming that they're authentic. The scientific facts will ultimately determine the legitimacy of the find.
Working as a team, their research is both satisfying and productive. Both men are convinced that with the proper permits, enabling detailed geological analysis and subsurface study, if not excavation, that a breakthrough of major historical significance is in the making. Then, as though Wyatt's field successes were not enough to catapult the research into a whole new strata of discovery, a literally earth-shattering breakthrough takes place.
My disappointment at having to wait on a permit for a later date was offset by an earthquake that happened in 1978 that did a much better job of excavating the boat than I could have done in maybe a year or 2 years hard work.
The earthquake drops the veil of soil from along one side of the boat's remains, leaving exposed the timber-shaped ribs of the ancient vessel. Here, at 6,300 feet above sea level, in the mountains of Ararat, lies what appears to be the hull of a massive, ancient, man-made ship. The sides of the object clearly exposed, the outline of the hull as evident now as the object's incredible mass.
It simply dropped the earth away from the outside of the boat and left the rib timbers and other structures of the boat out there where you could see them. Also, there was a vertical split right down the center of the boat, which enabled me to measure the depth of the boat, plus get good, clean, fresh sample material out of there to have analyzed to tell us more about the chemical composition of the boat.
These two photos, post and pre-quake, establish the extent of nature's timely excavation. On the left, a photo taken in 1960 by the Turkish U.S. team. At right, a photo taken by the Wyatt expedition in 1979, shortly after the earthquake. These photos clearly illustrate the large quantities of earth displaced from the sides of the object, before the quake and after. The quake has cracked the object down the center, allowing fresh soil samples to be taken for analysis. Samples are taken from the near vicinity as well to identify any significant differences in quantities of trace chemicals. The samples are rushed back to the United States, where they are immediately analyzed. The results are electrifying. A high carbon content in the soil taken from where the boat's timbers are exposed provides evidence of long decayed wood. Traces of metal are detected, revealing the possibility of objects such as metal supports. These are the first factual signs that the object is not simply a natural phenomenon, but may prove to be man-made.
Soil samples have been taken from the formation on 2 different occasions, in 1979 and again in 1984. It's the 1979 samples that first gave the clue that there is a distinct difference in the amount of carbon in the formation as opposed to the field outside of the formation. I have the reports here. If there was wood in this formation, that kind of a reading with 5% of carbon content would point to it. That's the kind of reading you would expect to get from the decayed wood.
Once we became aware that there were concentrations of metal in this boat formation that were associated with what appeared to be structural remains, the next obvious step was to investigate the site with the use of metal detectors. We set up a expedition with permit to go out with 4 types of metal detection equipment, and with this we carefully surveyed the boat, and we laid out survey tape on top of the ground or on top of the formation to indicate the position of the metal patterns in the boat.
5 field research specialists, including Dr. John Baumgartner, a physicist from Los Alamos National Laboratories, accompany Ron on his next expedition. Using metal detection devices, they construct from the evidence gathered the unmistakable pattern, the regular features delineating a symmetrical, internal,